Lets it fly. R-I-D-I-C-U-L-O-U-S. Ridiculous.
They're going to have to trade the run for the out. The throw over to third. Ball game.
Wow. The fifth year to try and put it away with an ace. That's a storybook ending.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. It's time for episode 36 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Last week, I had to jinx the Cavaliers' magical 15-0 start by going into a little bit too much detail about it. We'll note how that ended and how it stacks up with some of the other great starts in the history of the association. I also mentioned an incredible Yahoo Sports article on the injury rate of star players in the NBA and how cranked up that is right now. I took some more guesses about who's the next NFL head coach to get fired, and for at least another week, everybody held on. Things on tap for today: Fantasy Football Friday number 6. Trade deadlines are coming up and the playoffs are 3 weeks away. Let's throw out a couple of guys to trade for, or even a few gems on waivers that just might be league winners. If I feel I have time, we'll try and sneak in some MLB postseason awards as well. I've been making and checking back on those predictions pretty often throughout the season, and I'll evaluate how I did on them. I just realized I never did predict all of the Gold Glove and Silver Slugger winners. I'll make a note on that for next year because I really think that has to be an episode all its own with just how many of them there are. Nonetheless, here we go for today. Believeland is still a real place, and the Cavaliers are still the best team in the early part of the NBA season, but they just lost their first game to the Celtics. It just had to be Boston, didn't it? I don't know that anybody else in the East was really going to beat the Cavs, really, but I almost wish it could have been somebody like the Wizards or the Raptors, or another team that's just struggled a lot in the early going, so that there could be some sort of better story behind it. The Cavs naturally won the game right after that, and they're 16-1 through a little over 20% of the season. Something tells me they're going to be just fine. Boston's 12-3, and in my minimally analytical basketball mind, these will be the two best teams in the league this year anyway. If they meet in the conference finals, I think that would be quite a bloodbath. The Cavs will tie for the second longest winning streak to start a season of all time at 15. That 2015-16 Warriors streak is perfectly safe, and honestly, I don't think anybody can match that 73-9 record from that season either. This year's Cavs will probably have the best chance of any team for, decades to come probably, but that remains to be seen. And do they have the same level of talent as that Warriors team? No. Frankly, hardly any other teams in the history of the league ever have. There is a reason. You can't accidentally win 73 games. The Cavs this year are maybe even more physical than that Warriors team. If they start really making noise, of course I'll look back into this. But they've got a great chance to be the best team this year, and really all you should be thinking about is that Larry O'Brien trophy. So just a quick note on the NBA. I want to go right into Fantasy Football Friday, because if you're like me, you've been throwing out a whole bunch of trade deals. I'm talking 2-for-1s, 3-for-2s, and you're shooting high all week long, but nobody has been willing to bite. People are mostly too afraid to make moves, or they don't necessarily understand the significance behind them. That can be frustrating, but you also have to understand that not too many people have the time and energy on their hands to get into fantasy at the deepest level like I and some others do. Know your league mates and meet them kind of where they are. If nobody's willing to make any kind of trade before the deadline, and I know in ESPN leagues that deadline is next Wednesday, November 27th, then that's that, right? But don't settle up until then. Let's talk about who you should target to make the playoffs and, hey, possibly win your league. First league winner is set to play this Sunday after spending 3 games and a bye week on IR with a hamstring injury. Note, these guys will be rostered in essentially 100% of leagues, so you will have to trade for them. Mike Evans, mark my words, will be the savior of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and your team's season. If you have him, play him immediately. If you don't, be willing to put together a pretty healthy trade package to get him. You're likely aware of this absurd streak that he's had going. He's had 1,000 yards receiving every single year he's been in the league, and he only now has 7 games to continue that streak. He needs around 95 yards a game to do that after missing games here. Let me be so clear on this. The Bucs have been decimated by injuries, And this Sunday versus the Giants, they'll be feeding Mike Evans like crazy. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a dozen targets or more, and the Giants secondary is neither good nor experienced. Teams and coaches will tell you that they're not aware of player stats and streaks and things like that, but I fully believe that they typically are, at least for the high-profile ones like this. Baker and Mike Evans will force that streak if at all possible, and I think he should be roughly a top 5 receiver the rest of the way. Plus, the Bucs are 4-6. They really need to win most of their games down the stretch in order to even get into the playoffs. Desperate pretty much always equals dangerous, and this is a great situation for Mike Evans. Next, I never thought I'd put a Steelers receiver on a list of good fantasy acquisitions, but George Pickens is playing possessed right now. It's taken him until now in year 3 to kind of show it, but I think Pickens should be a Pro Bowler for many years to come. Russell Wilson throws this deep ball that commentators have been referring to as a moon ball for years now. This sort of really high-arcing but aesthetic and beautiful deep ball that just works so well with Pickens' style. He's 6'3", and he makes a ridiculous, almost indescribable catch pretty much every single week. Pickens doesn't get amazing volume of targets, especially now as the Steelers are actually running the ball quietly pretty well. But he's 4th in the league in yards, and he averages over 15 yards a catch for the year. The reason why we're upgrading Pickens so much right now, it's basically all because of the switch from Justin Fields to Russell Wilson at quarterback for the Steelers, and I'm totally okay with that. I already offered Colts running back Jonathan Taylor for Pickens straight up, and I got rejected, so I might even make a little bit more complicated of an offer later, because I think Pickens is another league winner. I would be remiss if I didn't go through all of the major position groups, really, and talk a little bit about waivers, because it's possible this guy is actually still on them in at least some leagues. Jonnu Smith is the Dolphins' top tight end, and now he has a chance to break out big time in the final third of the year. Last week, he had 6 catches for 101 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Raiders. The numbers for the year up until that game, well, they definitely wouldn't have leapt out at you by any means, but with as awful as the tight end production around the whole league has been, he will be likely the best tight end that's left on waivers. He's always been a freak athlete. He had this really elite combine, and he ran, a 4.62 at around 250 pounds and all those kind of things. Had great broad jump and vertical and all that. It was all in these unimaginative, underachieving offenses. You're talking drafted by the Titans, and then Patriots and Falcons. Just wasn't used very much or very well. Now he has Mike McDaniel as his head coach, who I think is a top 5 offensive mind, really. Somewhere in the neighborhood of, Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, those kind of guys. And, of course, more importantly, a healthy Tua throwing him the ball. Well, at least a physically healthy Tua, you know what I mean? Go ahead and pick up Jonnu Smith if he's on waivers and you need a tight end. Of course, you always need multiple good running backs. I am personally almost every week playing 3 running backs right now with one in my flex spot. I have some thoughts on these, but I think that running backs are highly stratified, similar to tight ends. If you don't have one of the best guys already, it's entirely possible that, frankly, you're not going to get any of them. So, what league winner could you possibly get on waivers? I can't lie. There's tons of running back injuries that have piled up throughout the season, and this is the weakest waiver wire position in most leagues and most formats. If I had to pick 1 or 2, I think the first guy I'm going with is the guy scoring the touchdowns right now, and that's Roschon Johnson from the Bears. He has 5 touchdowns on only 46 carries on the year. That is a completely unsustainable pace, which you hate to chase unless the Bears' offense really gets cooking and gets out of this big slump that they've been in. Johnson is not the starter, which is never really good news, and that title still belongs to DeAndre Swift, at least for now. But Johnson caught the ball a fair amount last year as a rookie, 34 catches for over 200 yards in that number 2 back role. If you say that changes, then I think that this is a fine idea. The one other guy to take a look at, which I bet is probably on waivers in your league, is the Steelers' Jaylen Warren. He has started to look closer and closer to a perfect 1B to Najee Harris. Najee will still get a whole lot more of the carries, unfortunately, but Jaylen Warren has always caught the ball really well, and his run after the catch, plus anytime he's out in the open field, there's a lot to like about him. He'll be playing in the Thursday night game tonight. Probably going to have a pretty good chance to get into the end zone against the Browns. I did say waivers, so that's roughly the best you'll get, one of those two guys when it comes to running backs. Finally, we'll quickly hit on quarterback. I think this is going to be pretty easy. There are more viable options here than pretty much any place else, like the position is known to be. There's a reason why you don't have to draft quarterbacks, first or second round. If you can get Tua on waivers, you're definitely not in a super deep league, but go ahead and do it anyway. All of the Dolphins' best offensive skill players are pretty much healthy and on the field together, and that's a really good start. Sometimes that's all it takes. From there, they're another one of those desperate teams who are at 4-6 right now. They're in a situation almost exactly like the Buccaneers. They need to come pretty close to winning out in order to make the playoffs. Now, if you can't get who you want on waivers and you're looking to make a trade, this is typically the time where Patrick Mahomes becomes the best quarterback on the planet and the Chiefs become unbeatable for the rest of the year. I would definitely recommend a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-2 package to get him. If you have to send a little bit more than you're getting back, quote unquote, as long as Mahomes is kind of the best player in that package, I still think you win. Side note, that Bills-Chiefs game on Sunday night was such art. Josh Allen hopefully won the MVP in that one with the signature 4th-and-2 scramble. If you didn't see that one, the Bills are up 2 and trying to put the game away. They're at the 27 of the Chiefs. And then Josh just flat out embarrasses the Chiefs' middle linebacker, Nick Bolton, as if that guy doesn't weigh 250, and he trucks their safety, Brian Cook, like a little boy into the end zone for a 27-yard touchdown. Oh, man. Of course, it's Kansas City's only loss this year, so they'll probably still be fine, but I digress. The Thursday Night Football game for tonight is the opening game of Week 12. After this week, we'll be 2/3 of the way through this regular season. It's wild. This week, it's the Steelers and the lowly Cleveland Browns. They have the fun reverse records, with the Steelers being 8-2 and the Browns coming in 2-8. In terms of over and underachievers compared to expectations, these are pretty close to each end of the spectrum. The Steelers' best player may literally be their kicker, Chris Boswell. Shout out to this guy in fantasy, by the way. He's currently K1, and he scored 24 points last week. Still, the Steelers are going to Steelers. You know what I mean? They're not fun to watch. They are not creative. They are not explosive. And yet, they win games all the time, every single year. Hate it or love it. They're typically led by TJ Watt playing Superman off the edge, of course, and that guy gets, 20 sacks every year. He had 19 last year and still didn't win the Defensive Player of the Year. A bit curious, but you will have a great, sort of edge-rushing matchup, quote-unquote, with Myles Garrett, of course, on the other side for the Browns. That was the guy last year who won the Defensive Player of the Year. TJ only, quote-unquote, has 7.5 sacks so far. Oh, yeah, and he leads the league in forced fumbles with 4 and is tied for second with 12 tackles for loss. He's actually so good that it's kind of frustrating, and he might be the single most clutch player in the league at any position because of the way he just turns it on and makes plays in the fourth quarter. It's almost biblical. Russell Wilson looks like he's doing enough as the starting quarterback for the Steelers, and they are a very good team, if not a very fun one. If they win this, you got to start talking about them a little bit more as kind of Super Bowl contenders. I hate to say it. The Browns are still as much of an organizational disaster as ever. Naturally, they beat the Ravens in Week 8, who were looking unstoppable at that time, but their only other win came in Week 2 in Jacksonville with a pretty heinous score of 18-13. Everybody's heard by now that Deshaun Watson ruptured his Achilles, and he cemented his status as the man with the worst contract in the history of the NFL. And, gosh, maybe pro sports in general, frankly. And this one should be untouchable for a long time, too. Watson's played 19 games in 3 years with Cleveland, and he's been one of the worst QBs in the league by most measures over that time. He might be a better human being than a football player at this point, and that is generationally sad. The salary cap hit on his contract for next year and the year after is literally almost $73 million. If that were an entire 25-man MLB payroll, it would be more than the soon-to-be former Oakland Athletics. The Browns have no way to get out of this deal really before the end of 2026, at least without burning tens of millions of dollars, and they have a very poor performing, perpetually injured quarterback with some of the most publicized off-the-field issues in history. Rant on Deshaun Watson over, but I just wanted to re-clarify how worst-case scenario the Browns really have it there. So, since Watson got injured, they've been starting 2015 number 1 overall pick Jameis Winston at quarterback. Just like Jameis always does, he takes you through the entire Jameis Winston experience, right? He went almost perfect with well over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns to beat the Ravens. Then he throws 3 interceptions and only leads them to 10 points against the Chargers. Jameis has been doing this for the last decade, and you frankly can't stop him. I'm just going to roll the dice hard on predictions with him, and I'm going to say he has another very solid game Thursday, if for no other reason than for the Browns to really play spoiler. This game's being played in Cleveland, and it's going to be rainy, really cold. Gosh, I wonder if it could even snow. I'm going to say still, Jameis goes over 300 yards. Let's say just 1 turnover. Maybe picks up a rushing touchdown and leads a game-winning drive. I think the Steelers make at least 4 field goals for the 5th time this year, but they come up short. And we'll go something in the neighborhood of 22-19 for the final score. Cleveland, I'm picking the upset. Now for a super quick expose on MLB postseason awards to end it off for today. I'll compare the results to the final predictions I made after the All-Star break. I had my guess for that week, Hunter Myers, and gosh, guys, I feel like we kind of nailed it. Now, you know the easy ones, right? TA-RIK Daniel SKU-BAL, best pitcher on earth, a Triple Crown winner, and now the unanimous AL Cy Young winner, getting all 31st place votes from that Baseball Writers Association. That was insanely obvious. Chris Sale won the Triple Crown in the NL, but believe it or not, even the voters didn't find him quite as dominant as SKU-BAL, seeing as he got 26 of the 31st place votes. We were right on 1 out of 2 there. I actually had originally gone with the Phillies Ranger Suarez, but he missed a few starts with injuries in the second half, and he only ended up throwing about 150 innings, in addition to his second half ERA jumping up. Sale really got hotter throughout the entire second half, and kind of the last couple of months was essentially untouchable. Now, moving into MVP, I'm essentially doing a live reaction recording here because the MVPs are being announced right now on MLB Network, and you'll never guess who they are. It's Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani. They had these won by the time we got to maybe mid-August, but it is official now. Unanimous wins for each of them is pretty historic, but not at all unexpected. No one is going to replicate these kinds of seasons for a long time unless, well, it's one of them again. Hunter and I got both Rookies of the Year right, and they were both starting pitchers. The Yankees, Luis Hill, and the Pirates, Paul Skeens. And a quick deeper dive on Skeens here. He was 3rd in the Cy Young, too, and I think he almost certainly would have won it if he had been in the majors for the full season. Yes, even over Chris Sale. That is how ridiculous I think this guy is. Skeens had a 1.93 ERA and went 11-3, playing for a, well, not good Pirates team. Plus, he started the All-Star game. Absolutely absurd. The only other major pick I missed on, believe it or not, was NL Manager of the Year. I had Rob Thompson from the Phillies. It made a lot of sense because they had the best record in the league for, well, most of the year, and they played great in matchups and situationally. Instead, though, this one went to Pat Murphy with the Brewers, and I have no problem with that one either. That team definitely has less talent than most of the other 90-plus win teams that made the playoffs, and Murphy was in his first full season as a manager. Then for the AL, just as I thought, it was another recently retired player. Honestly, all of those guys are pretty much successful, and I've hit on that recently, but Stephen Vogt is the guy this time with the Cleveland Guardians. This one stings even a little bit more with the context that they knocked my gritty Tigers out of the playoffs in the ALDS. But nonetheless, Stephen Vogt is the fastest guy ever to go from a former player to manager of the year. That took 397 days, so that's pretty cool. Cleveland doesn't have a huge payroll, and they made it interesting in the ALCS versus an obviously overpowered Yankees team. As much as I hate it, it's much deserved for Stephen Vogt. All told, from the All-Star break predictions, I went 6 out of 8 on the biggest awards, and I'm pretty thrilled about that. So that's about all I have for today. Fall sports have now officially wrapped up for me. I've got more tape to go through and make highlights and audio clips and demo reels from, but I'm ready to really get deep into basketball too and probably try to think and watch a lot more analytically. I really want to be able to hang with, the current and former players and pro commentators a little bit better in terms of what's actually going on the floor. So hopefully I can get into that more, nerdy side of that on the show a little bit. As always, whatever else catches my mind is always on the table. And remember, feel free to hit me on my socials if you have an idea for me. Instagram and TikTok at The Voice of Tanner. Connect on LinkedIn. And of course, leave a like, comment, and share. This has been episode 36 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
Field, lets it fly. RIDICULOUS. Ridiculous.
They're going to have to trade the run for the out. The throw over to third. Ball game.
The fifth year to try and put it away with an ace. That's a storybook ending.